Hey, welcome back to the Nonprofit Leadership Studio, our focus on fundraising. Another great guest for us this evening. We have Michael Larson, who's the head of advancement over at the Fay School, and a good buddy of mine, and we're real excited to talk a little bit about private school fundraising, but also I know that you have a wealth of information about fundraising, Mike. When we've talked, it's always been enlightening to me, I think. So I was real excited that you were able to come and talk with us. I want to start with a question that I ask really a lot of the guests who sit in this chair. If you were writing a book on fundraising, what would some of your chapters be?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question, and I'll answer by saying I think that the chapters I would have to spend a lot more time on, but there would be two big sections, and that would be donors and it would be data. And I think that those are the two pieces. If I was starting a development office from scratch, those would be the two pieces I focused on. And to sort of take a step farther back, I would actually say, you know, if you're a one-person organization, I think your first hire is a data person, right? Your ED focuses on donors, your data person focuses on data, because we are only as good as the data we keep. The only way to effectively steward donors is to know the path that we've traveled with them. And so I think we have to address both those areas. So
do you think that's a changing thing, this whole idea of data? Because I have to say, a lot of people that we've had here, they don't really bring up data.
Yeah.
You're a little bit younger. Do you think this is sort of the wave of the future?
Yeah, well, so I think that, so I guess I would imagine if you really dug deep into people who have been doing amazing jobs fundraising for a long, long time, you would find that there's a focus on data there.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times what we are seeing, I do think a shift we're seeing higher job turnover.
Yeah.
You know, so you're not necessarily seeing a director of development who's at an organization for 40 or 50 years and has a vault of information stored within themselves to manage those relationships. And so I think we have a responsibility to make sure that the organization goes beyond our time at the organization. And luckily today we have the tools available to us to do that in a really effective way. And so I think we owe it to not only ourselves, but the people who follow us, the leadership who follows us, to make sure that we're setting them up for success. Because the donor gives to the organization, not to me, and certainly not to me if I've gone on.
Well, you know, I had written in my notes this exact thing because you and I were talking a couple months ago, and you said this thing, hey, people give to an organization, they don't give to people. And it's completely different. I don't know how many people I've talked to that say, oh no, people give to people, they don't give to organizations. And they're talking about the relationship. Tell us why you're turning that on its head a little bit.
Well, I think people absolutely give to people, right? They're not going to give to a robot. They don't respond the same way to a letter in the mail that they do to a person sitting in front of them. I think what we as the people in that spot have a responsibility to do is to make sure we're taking ourselves to some degree out of the situation and making sure we're facilitating a relationship between the donor and the organization we work for. Because I think for us to assume the organization will experience the same degree of success once we go on, if we're not doing that, can be a huge fault and can really put organizations at risk. You know, I think about Jim Collins' Good to Great, right? This idea that, you know.
This is our text in the class, by the way.
Well, there you go. I'm glad I brought it up. I didn't know that, so that's a nice coincidence. But, you know, the idea that if we're not building organizations that will last beyond us, I think is really important for us to consider, and especially in fundraising, because it's so easy to build these relationships. I'll give what I consider to be a fairly negative example. I was working with an organization who had engaged a consultant who, quote, came with a set of relationships. Well, the troubling part about that is that consultant will leave with that set of relationships as well. And so what you're really paying for is that consultant and their relationships. And I'm not sure that we're effectively connecting donors to our missions if we're doing that. And I think we have to be really cautious about engaging in that same activity as full-time employees.
What do you do when, let's say you're consulting with a nonprofit organization around fundraising, and you go in and you see that all the connections are the CEO. You know, it's all about the relationships, the CEO. And maybe she doesn't have a focus on fundraising, but she's a very good fundraiser, and you see that. How do you advise that organization to proceed in regards to developing a development program?
Yeah, so I think it's a good question, and I think so. I'll sort of go back to the idea of the organization that's just started. And the first person you hire is the data person. I think that. For us in the school world, we have a concept around advancement, which is sort of inclusive of a lot of things. And the idea is you take a constituent from the very beginning to the very end, right? From the moment they consider coming to your school to the moment they pass away, leaving behind a legacy for their children and hopefully their children, et cetera. And so it encompasses admissions, it encompasses development, it encompasses marketing communications. And I love the concept because it really recognizes that there has to be a person, and it's not there's no structural demands about who reports to who. It's really a philosophy that there needs to be one person who thinks of your donors, your constituents, within this context. So whether that's your executive director, your CEO, your director of development, your director of advancement, really doesn't matter, as long as someone's capturing that. And so I think to circle back to your question, what I think you have to be aware of is if your executive director is serving as that person with that umbrella vision, I think the most important thing is to talk about and build strategy around that. And how are we moving these people through so that you're prepared for any eventuality? You know, the ED moves on, who becomes that new person and how do you effectively hand off those relationships? So other people should be in the loop. It doesn't mean they should have less meetings or go to less dinners or cultivate in a different way. It just means that, you know, who's engaged in that conversation, so you're really bringing a group to bear on those strategic relationships.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about your specific area of development. You work for private schools. You work for a school here in Houston. I know a lot of the basics of development. No matter where you are, the basics are there. But what are some of the unique things about working within a school as opposed to working out at Texas Children's Hospital, let's say?
So I think probably the most unique thing, or perhaps not unique, but certainly the thing that you realize very quickly is your donors are right there with you every single day. So my day starts, if I don't have a meeting, with opening doors and letting kids out. I mean, you know, and actually that was one of the first pieces of advice I got when I joined this industry, and I share it with anyone coming in, is if you're not doing carpool in the mornings, you're crazy. Because it is an easy win. You know, the kids are smiling, they're happy to be coming to school, and you get to engage with every parent. You know, you get a quick just, hello, good morning, how are you, have a great day. And that's invaluable. You know, it's the casual conversations that are the deepest. You know, those are the cultivating moments. You know, and I think that in private schools, it's a challenge, certainly, because your donors are right there with you all the time, and they see everything that happens. But it's also an opportunity. You know, one of the things I talk a lot about is a notion of organic cultivation. And I really do believe that the most powerful cultivating moments are those that we have absolutely no control over. So I see my job as a fundraiser to really try to remove the veil of solicitation from as much as possible. No one comes to the Fay School to be asked for money. They come to the Fay School for a phenomenal education and to take part in a community that is positive and healthy and nurturing, not only to students but to families. And so how do I facilitate that? The solicitation, the moment of the ask, is a byproduct of everything else we do. And so I do think that's somewhat different in schools. You know, I spend most of my time not asking people for money, not even strategizing on how to ask people for money. I spend most of my time making sure that everything else we do happens in a really effective way, because frankly, that's our promise to our donors.
Wow. And are most of the development, is it going to be around individual giving?
Absolutely, yeah. We 95% of our funding comes from not only individual giving, but from our current parents, which I think is also...
So how much is current parents and how much are other parents?
Yeah, I would say of that 95%, 95% of that 95% are current parents. Now we are unique. Our school in particular runs 3-year-olds through 5th grade. So we're a purely elementary and early childhood school. Once you move into schools that have middle schools and absolutely schools that have high school programs, you begin to see alumni giving kicking up. And there's significant funding available through alumni giving. Statistically, elementary schools don't see that money. It's university, it's high school, and then it's everyone else. And so we really focus, and I think that's an important point, is that, there's, I constantly answer the question, well, let's start alumni programming. Let's build up alumni programming. I love our alumni. They go on to do great things. We'd love to have them back on campus. And I have limited resources at my disposal. So how much am I going to invest in alumni programming when I know that the resources to give the kids that we have in our school right now the very best education are not there? And those are hard choices to make.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you think of development in other places, as opposed to all the individual giving that's happening, is there a unique atmosphere within the Fay School because it's really a lot of affluent parents? Does that make your job easier? I know on some level it makes it harder because they may be more demanding and they're right there, but does it make it easier because you're in that presence?
Certainly. I think as I said, I think there are advantages and disadvantages. You have your donor pool. Our admissions office brings in a new set of families.
Right.
I know who my new families are, who I'm going to have a conversation with about the annual fund. So that part is absolutely easier. There's certainly, and I do think one of the challenges, one of the struggles around private education in general is this notion of affluence. We dedicate significant portions of our budget to tuition assistance, as do most private schools. It's a huge conversation in the industry, and it's really challenging because I do think the tuition, the price tag at the door, really turns people off, and there's not, which prevents the healthy conversation around providing tuition assistance and creating a socioeconomically diverse community. So it makes our job easier, and I do think it's challenging. As much as we have a great case for support with our current families, our case for support really doesn't rival other nonprofits in the city when you look to foundations and corporations. If I'm going to ask a big local corporation to fund the Fay School as opposed to the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, they have a better case for support in terms of how much revenue they have in front of them.
But when you think of individual donors, for those parents, the most important thing for them is the education of their kid, and if they can help contribute to that, they're excited about that. I would guess, right?
Absolutely. And I will say another challenge of private school education is the ticket, right? You've paid 18, 20, you get up into the Northeast, you paid $35,000, for a second grader, and it absolutely costs that much to educate them, and in fact, it costs more. And so there is this question for families who, we start at 3 years old, so you have a family who, frankly, has oftentimes never been asked for this amount of money before, if they've been solicited formally at all, and they've just written a significant check that they're happy about, they're invested, they think it's the right thing for their child, and now I'm sitting down with them asking them for more. And so that's a hard conversation to have. And so we do talk about why fundraising exists in private schools, because it's not intuitive. Our tuition doesn't cover the cost of operating our school. And not only that, but we're really interested in our families investing in us, which I do think changes the nature of the relationship,
Very briefly, for someone who's new to the world of private schools, why does Fay stand out? What is it about Fay that makes it, wow, this is a great place?
Great question. I love that question. I think my personal opinion is twofold. One, I think our really phenomenal programming that I personally believe in, and we as a school certainly believe in, is around emotional intelligence. I think if you looked at our leadership development program and compared it to other organizations, the way I phrase it is ours has teeth. We can tell you at 3 years old, this is what we're teaching, this is what we expect a student to see, just as you would math or science, language arts. We can tell you at second grade and fourth grade and fifth grade. And so our leadership development program is woven throughout. It's not a pull-out activity. It is as important to recognize that you have rights, you have responsibilities, and there are outcomes in math class as it is out at recess, as it is when you're 25 and entering the working world. And so I think that's something that we do very well and very differently, and it exists at both the student level and at the adult level. So it's how we expect our employees to behave as well. And so it's as likely that you will see 2 adults using the mediation tool as you will see 2 students using the mediation tool, because conflict exists, and at the heart of all conflict is some level of emotion.
Yeah. And in the world of schools in Houston, in Texas, and fundraising, are there a few sort of standout organizations for you that, wow, these guys, they know how to raise money?
Yeah, so I think one of my personal favorites for a very specific reason is St. John's, and it's because they do one fundraiser. They do their annual fund. That is what they do, and I think that in the world of private schools certainly, and I think in a lot of nonprofits, there is the idea that quantity equals quality and quantity equals funding. Well, let's just add another event. Let's do this, and I think that they're a nice exemplar and frankly do a great job, which allows other organizations to point to them and say, we don't have to do it this way. We don't have to have 40 events to raise money. This is an option. We don't have to copy it, but it's an option. And I think that's really important in the fundraising world because boards don't like to take risks. And I think having exemplars that we can say, no, it's, it can be done successfully is really important. And I do think that it also presents us with an opportunity to talk about the movement from transactional giving to relationship-based giving.
Any others besides St. John's that you put on that list?
Yeah, I think, I'll say nothing specifically, but I will say that the private school industry in general here in Houston, I think is incredibly collegial. So for any organization to be willing to reach out and share with other organizations, even direct competitors, I think is absolutely critical. We as an industry, I think really here in Houston look at things in terms of the rising tides. Lifts all boats metaphor.
Houston seems to be that way in many things. I mean, we all know who doesn't play well with others, but most people do play well with others.
Yeah,
it's sort of
absolutely. Nice. So I think they do a great job. I think Episcopal High School has developed some really fascinating new ways to approach the annual fund. John Cooper out in the Woodlands has done a great job of eliminating their every year gala and moving to an every other year cyber gala, where
What's
they're
a cyber
raising.
gala?
It's an online auction, but no event necessary.
So you don't have to show up. You could sit home on a Friday night and order pizza and be on the gala.
And bid. And they have been able, the risk, we run an every year gala. If we were to go to every other year, I'm going to have a conversation with my board, and the question is going to be, well, can you raise twice as much in off years? I don't think I can.
Right.
So the question becomes, how do you balance the budget? And they have been able to successfully, do away with the every year gala, which they were finding burnout from volunteers, from donors. It was just too much, and have a really successful new program. So I think there's a lot of schools doing really interesting, really innovative things here in Houston.
And are there? So I see nonprofits every once in a while that I look at and I think, what a great mission. It seems like they could be raising a lot of money. They're maybe underperforming. Do you see schools that oh my word, they could be doing so much better?
Yeah, I think so. I thought about this question before I came, and I will say it's not a school, but and I'm comfortable saying this because it's one of my favorite organizations in town. I think they have a phenomenal group of board members. I think they have an amazing program, and I think they're capable of so much more, and that's Leadership Houston.
Oh, yeah.
I would love to see them take off. I went through the program, 2-3 years ago, and
they've had a roller coaster of experience.
They have had a roller coaster of experience, and I think it's a classic example of two things. One, just ask. Just go out and ask. People love you. I had someone who I was working with doing some coaching of me, and I was really struggling with the idea of networking, right? Which is bad in the fundraising world. You need to be able to network, and I was really uncomfortable with it because I believe so strongly in relationship-based fundraising, that the idea of taking advantage of, oh, I want to meet you because I want this thing from you, really made me uncomfortable. So this is years ago, and we're talking about it. And she really challenged me to think about it in a different way, which is to say, your network already exists. It's full of people who love you and support you. All you have to do is tell them what you want to do. And they would love to come out of the woodwork. And I think fundraising is oftentimes in that same area, at least in the beginning. There are people who believe in you, who think what you put into the world is great. They just need to be asked, and they just need to be told how you're going to keep doing it. And I think they're a great example of that.
In the world of individual giving, and let's take it outside of the school, but just in general, if I'm working at a small nonprofit and I'm coming to you for advice and I say, how many times do I need to meet with someone before I can make that ask? How deep does that relationship have to be? What is your answer?
So I differ from many of my colleagues on this. Moves management, I think, has become a little overblown. I work with a group, Independent School Management, during the summer, and I actually teach a course on major gifts in small shops, and 95% of the course is about letting go of all of the structures that we've built into this idea of major giving, which applies to, solicitations of any kind. That, well, I better have talked to them 4 times before I even think about an ask.
I could never do that, by the way. I could never wait 4 times before
I ask.
Yeah.
So. So I think the answer is don't let that trip you up. Fundraising relationships are no different from other relationships, right? We develop a social emotional intelligence around sitting across from a person, knowing what is appropriate to say and do. And I think as fundraisers, we have to develop that social emotional sense of when it's appropriate to make a solicitation. So I think you look back at your data. Did I steward their last gift correctly? I think that's the number one question to ask yourself. This person gave me a $5,000 check 5 years ago. If I haven't talked to them, if they don't know what's going on in my organization, if I've ignored them, and my first call in 5 years is another solicitation, you probably have a problem. But I don't need a matrix to tell me that. I know my donors, I keep clean data, and I can go back and see, where we were. So that's, I think the notion of, at least at a smaller scale, the notion of having a checklist of how many times we've met before we can do X, Y, or Z is putting people too much into a box. And I think it hurts us more than it helps us oftentimes.
And I almost feel like if you're giving to the organization, and I agree with you, people are going to sit down because they want to give to children at risk, and they're already sitting there. And if you have the ability to develop a pretty good, deep relationship pretty quickly, and it's natural, it's not forced, they're waiting for you to ask.
Absolutely. I think they're waiting for you to ask, and I also think that I have worked at 3 different schools now, and I really struggle. I get asked this question, and I'm sure I'm missing something. I don't think I've ever gotten a no. I've gotten a not yet. I've gotten a we're not sure. I've never gotten a no, never talk to me again.
Right.
I hate you, I hate your organization. That I wouldn't be sitting down talking to that person if that was the case. You wouldn't get to that point. And so I think a lot of it is letting go of the misperceptions, letting go of the fear, letting go of the, oftentimes I think people put the structure of the number of meetings in place to actually extend the amount of time before they have to make the ask. Not because of the donor, but because of ourselves.
Yeah. We're running out of time in this, but there are 2 other things. I wanted to, your personal history. You grew up in Dallas. You went to a private school yourself.
I did. I went to...
K through 12, were you private?
Yeah, I did a very small neighborhood Montessori school in Oak Cliff. And then that school ended in 3rd grade, so I went out to North Dallas and went to the Alcuin School. So I was in Montessori through 8th grade, which was a private school, very different experience. Then went to Jesuit. So still private, but again, very different. I think that's worth pointing out too, is that private schools come in a lot of shapes and sizes. Jesuit served a very different population than Alcuin did, than Greenhill did. Here in town, Strake and Kincaid and Presbyterian and St. Francis all serve very different populations.
Pope Pius. I mean, it's a big...
They're all over the place, and so there's many opportunities both for students and for fundraisers. My first public school experience was UT Austin. So yeah, I went from a very small school to
There you
a
go.
very large school.
Not quite UHD, but
Not UHD,
but a good school nevertheless.
Yep.
And then this week, where the class is studying a lot about email solicitation, sort of online stuff. Is that the future? Do you see that as a real future potential in regards to development?
I think there's potential, and I think a really important conversation that's going on right now is, we've seen it in the world of the one day of giving, right? Day of giving, challenge days, that kind of stuff. They raise great money. I think the conversation that is going on that needs to continue to happen is to really be deliberate about what kind of giving we're engaged in that moment. If we're asking someone to make a gift based on something they saw on Facebook for 30 seconds, that tends to be more transactional. So, and I don't have a problem with that, but I think let's call it what it is, and let's be careful about that and recognize that if we're all transactional, we need to know we're all transactional, and there are metrics around that. And then I think a critical question to ask is, what would be possible if we moved our top donors down the road towards relationship-based giving? And I think that email solicitations, online giving, social solicitations really do fall into that category. And so I think we just need to be really honest about what we're doing, because to think that that's relationship-based, I think is a risk.
It's all informational based, right? It's just it's a good way of getting information out.
It
and
is.
It's a good combo type of thing.
It is, and it raises good money. And I think that if we stop there, we're leaving some money on the table.
Exactly. Good. Well, let me go to the Twitterverse to see what everyone's wants to question you about, Michael. Let's see. Oh, this is interesting. So Heidi Kelly wants to know, how do you create an environment with your staff that the organization becomes the center of the donor's world? That's a nice question.
Yeah, that is a great question. I think that one of the things I like to say is that we should make sure that our donors see us working hard. If the only time our donors see us is at a solicitation or at dinner or in cultivating, very formal cultivating situations, I think we're making a mistake. So I think that my staff and I work really hard to make sure our donors see that we're working to make their experience at what we do, right, in which in a private school is educating their kids, but in a nonprofit is delivery on mission. So how are we communicating to our donors what our daily lives really are like, and how we're translating their funding into outcomes. And that doesn't have to be necessarily doing the thing that your organization does. I also think it can be engaging in the act of fundraising, right? Overheads are critical to organizations. That's another sort of soapbox of mine, is that I think the microscope on overhead, I would love to shift that to talk about investment, right? How long did it take for Amazon to make money, right? No one blinks an eye looking at investing in Amazon, because they know it's the long game. And frankly, our world faces challenges that are huge, and we hold the nonprofits who are working to address those challenges to a different kind of standard. And so in order to scale solutions, we have to be able to scale organizations. And I think the way we jump over that hurdle is by making sure our donors see the work we're doing with them, and as importantly, share the strategy behind what we're doing. They may not understand the strategy, and their eyes may glaze over, but I really believe that donors care that there's a mind at work behind what they're giving their money to.
Very interesting. Ron Domron has a really interesting question. Is it difficult to raise funds? And this is sort of this age-old question from parents who are already paying a lot of money to go to a particular place. How does that happen? But it's not unusual in schools. I mean, you see big medical bills and you still donate to the hospital.
Right.
I mean, we see this happening. Is it, once you develop the relationships though, is it difficult or is it hard to get to that point?
Yeah, I think, so to talk about this in a little more detail, I think it's about education. And I think it's about a compelling case and about being really honest why you need the funding. And I think some of these lessons come from our own donors. A huge learning moment for me was during a new family solicitation. So I'm sitting here and there's 4 or 5 couples around me, all brand new to the school. They are all being solicited for leadership level gifts.
What's a leadership level?
For us, it's $2,500 to the annual fund. So we're asking them to consider a gift. During the moment of solicitation, we ask them to consider a gift at $2,500, $5,000, or $10,000, which are our 3 leadership levels. And so we're doing the solicitation, and a donor turns to me and says, I really want to know what this is going to go towards. What is this for? And I sort of pivot around to my normal, well, this is what annual fund did last year, and da-da-da-da-da. So in private schools, annual funds are directed towards unrestricted operation dollars. We have some ideas about what we're going to build out and what we're going to do. It's all budgeted, but it's not as specific as a capital campaign where we're going to build that building right there. And he did not like my answer of what happened last year, and he pushed back in. He said, I don't care what happened last year. I want to know what will my money buy this year? And man, I tried 4 or 5 times to give him an answer. And finally, in a moment of, to be perfectly frank, exasperation and desperation, I said, it's what lets us say yes. And I told him that, he runs his own organization. And he knows that in order to be really effective at what he does, he needs to be in a position to take advantage of opportunities. And education, frankly, is no different. Your child is in 1st grade. If we find something that our teachers say is right, that our principal says is right, that our head and board want, my job is to make sure they can afford it. Not 12 months from now, but right now. Because 12 months is a long time in the life of a kid. So your annual fund gift is what allows us to say yes when we need to say yes. And I'm happy to say he made a gift and continues to make a gift.
Well, that's a great answer, though, Michael.
And it has really transitioned our case for support for the annual fund, and that has become a normal part of our conversation.
Yeah.
And it turns out it's really true.
Yeah.
And again, I think I found myself living in an old notion of, I had to verify, I had to talk about, well, it purchased this and this and this last year because that's how I had learned to do it. And I sort of let go of that and talked about, really, what's the strategy? What do we use this money for? What conversations do we have moving forward based on the gift you make? And it's about jumping on opportunities that are right for the kids.
Wow. Martha Garcia wants to know, how does your board differ from boards working in organizations that aren't private schools? That's a really good question.
Yeah, so again, like many of the conversations tonight, I think it's advantages and disadvantages. The biggest difference, I think, is that the board members, many of the board members in private schools are recipients of the school's mission, right? So we have many current parents on our board, which is great because they're invested in the organization. They wouldn't be there if they weren't interested in the kind of education we provide. It's challenging because they're interested in the kind of education we provide for their own children. And so I think a challenge that is not unique to us, but is perhaps expanded for us, is this difference between agenda-based roles and functional roles. So, a current parent has to take off their functional hat when bringing themselves to the board table. They have to let go of what effect this would have on my child, and yet I do want their perception of things as a current parent. That's critical to me. So, can you step up to the board table and bring me your perception and your ideas that are based around your role, but then make a decision that ignores your role completely and puts you in the board seat. So I think that's a huge difference, which comes, again, with its benefits and its
What percentage
challenges.
of your board are current parents? Almost
80%.
all? 80%.
Yeah.
And would you say, with some exceptions, are they the biggest donors probably as parents?
Yeah, with some exceptions. I
Yeah.
would say that's probably true. And a difference, again, for our schools, we're only 25 years old, so our board makeup looks very different from a school that's been around for 200 years. Growing your board, profiling your board, and by profiling I mean, deciding who needs to be where, where we have gaps, is a long process. In the fundraising world, we wish we could snap our fingers and just move all the pieces around and have the perfect board, and that's just not how it works. You select people who are passionate and dedicated, and when you're a young startup organization, those are not always easy to find. And I'm thrilled that we have the people we do on our board.
So Maya Bean wants to know, How did you get over a fear of networking? Did you ever have a fear of networking?
I did, and it was, I'm not sure I would call it a fear. I just didn't like the idea. Frankly, it creeped me out. It was that idea of, I'm going to meet Bob, and I'm going to meet him because I know that he knows this guy, and, we can do this. And we talk a lot about this in the fundraising world in pretty casual ways, and that just made me super uncomfortable. And I really did move beyond that and recognize that it's not necessarily about the person you want to meet. It's about the person you already know and starting with them. And I think there's a natural and organic expansion of your network when you start with the folks who are already your greatest fans. You already know who they are. You just look past them because they're in the bank, right? So the gut instinct is to look at the person you don't know, when really you should just turn to the people you do know. I think this plays out oftentimes in fundraising where we look beyond our board to start fundraising when the very first conversation should be with people on the board. How deeply have you developed those relationships? Don't go talk to somebody not on your board when you don't have this house in order yet.
Yeah. That's an interesting point, right? And that goes back to this whole idea of stewardship.
Yeah.
Very good. So let's see. So Valerie Garate wants to know, do you think it's wrong for an organization to hire someone in their development team who has connections to the donor world?
I don't think it's wrong to do. I'm not sure it's the right reason to do it. And that's probably an overstatement. I would say it's something to be cautious about. Similar to the
It's sort of a rookie mistake, though, sometimes, isn't it?
Yes. You're not looking for someone who can simply get a meeting, right? Because again, you're back into that world of that is really a person giving to a person, not an organization. And I think you have to think long term about that. So okay, I hired this person. They know this person. I was able to get a $20,000 gift within 5 days, and I'm over the moon. Well, what happens next year and the year after? And does this person really work with the other folks on my team well? And how does that affect them? And there's all kinds of complicated pieces down the road. And I think it's as important to know when to not take a gift, whether it comes in the form of hiring the gift or a donation, as it is to look at when to.
That being said, if you interview people and they're the right fit for the organization and they happen to have connections, it's just icing on the cake.
It's icing on the cake.
But so many times I see this mistake where people say, and this is in all aspects of the nonprofit world, where people say, well, he seems to know a lot of people.
Yeah.
Well, great. Yeah. How is he going to
work? And I guarantee you he has not spent the last 10 years talking about your organization, which is what actually has to happen. And I actually, while I don't think it's a problem that they have connections, I do think there's some extra work and extra emphasis to be placed around, great, how are we going to cultivate those connections within the context of our organization? Because just because you know Joe, and Joe happens to have capacity, if Joe is not passionate about ballet,
right,
then we probably don't need Joe as a donor. We need people who are passionate about ballet, and if Joe wants to come to our gala and buy a table and have a good time, that's great. But we're not going to invest a ton of resources and energy in developing a relationship with someone who has capacity but no inclination.
There you go. John Bogucki wants to know about high tuition for-profit private schools. Are there high-profit? Are there for-profit schools, and how do you work with them?
Yeah, there absolutely
are.
Okay, so I'm not going to get this right. I want to say, I apologize in advance if I have this wrong. I believe the Village School is for-profit. I know of a for-profit in Dallas, the Learning Tree. And they're an interesting, there's not a lot of them.
Yeah.
They are different, and I think it's a really interesting notion. I don't think it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I think it's
if they're doing a good education.
Well, right? Well, right. That's their case for support. It just comes through the venue of a transaction. You're going to pay for a really high quality product, which are these students we deliver. Would I work for a for-profit school? Probably not, just because I think a critical component to the education we do in private schools is that investment. It's that extra voluntary investment that you make in the form of a gift. And I think that's a critical piece. Not to mention the fact that I probably couldn't get a job at a for-profit school because they don't do what I do. So there you go. It works out okay.
Very interesting. So Edith Rahimian wants to know, do private schools ever partner with public schools or charter schools? Do you see some of that? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Gosh, I'm trying to think. Just the other day I read an article, Kincaid and a public school partnered and did, I want to say they put on a production of Hairspray.
That's right.
Am I crazy?
With Carter from the Aldine School District.
Yes, yes. And and I think it was, most critically, I think it was a huge growth experience for the students.
For both of those schools.
For both of those schools, for everyone involved, And
the kids at Carter couldn't believe the nice cars that everyone had at Kincaid, and
it was. That was the banner headline. No, I think they absolutely do, and I do think it's important. One of the things one of my big takeaways from Leadership Houston, and the reason I enjoyed it the most, was it really did break me out of the private school world. And I think regardless of what sector or what area you're fundraising in, getting out and recognizing that your nonprofit lives and thrives within a network of a lot of important things going on. And I do think the work we do at Fay is absolutely critical, and so are many other things. And so how are we networking? How are we interfacing? We can never do a perfect job, but we certainly can do a better job.
Yeah. And along those lines, Francisco Aldana wants to know, what type of outreach do you do to reach marginalized communities? Are there any kids that are coming from other communities into the Fay School?
It's a great question, and similar to what I said earlier, it's a real challenge. It's a huge challenge in our industry. I was having a conversation just the other day. We know we face an issue with tuition increases, because typically schools increase their tuition anywhere between 3 to 8% every year.
Yeah.
Well, you play that out over 20 years, and you're very quickly looking at a price tag for private schools that seems absolutely undoable. And I think a real concern in the market is, as we move towards that, I'm not sure it means that we will no longer have customers, but I definitely think it means that we'll have a different kind of customer. And where I really get concerned is private schools aren't going to do away with tuition assistance.
Right.
But what I do think it means is that we structurally encourage kids who can pay outright and who live at this end of the wealth gap, and then we fund tuition assistance, and we have this gap in the middle.
Yeah.
And I really do think we lose something, and that is perhaps a commentary on a larger issue of wealth, the increasing wealth gap. But I think we're going to see it not only in private education, but in a lot of other sectors.
Let me ask you maybe a hard question, Michael. When my daughter was about to enter kindergarten, and it might have been a year before, we decided we would tour around schools, and we had the capability to send our daughter to private school if we wanted to. And we visited a lot of schools, and some private schools were amazingly white, right? There's just no diversity at all. Others weren't. And we ended up settling for public school, which we thought, we asked the right questions, we seemed to get the right answers. If we had done that tour, if we do that tour of the Fay School today, what will our reaction be?
Yeah. So our diversity really lies in our international families. So we have a lot of expats who come in, which we're particularly proud of. And we, along with most of the other private schools in the area, don't fetch as much diversity as we would like to and as we should be from our local community. And I'm not sure it's necessarily an issue that is dedicated to race or socioeconomic status. I've made a lot of friends throughout the city, and many of them, friends I made in college who live in other cities, just can't even fathom the idea of spending that kind of money on private school. They just,
that's right.
It just sort of, their minds blow. Like, well, there's a free school down the road. Why on earth would I spend $20,000 a year to send my child to school? And it turns out that education is a complicated thing. There's a reason it costs so much money, just like medicine or any of the other things. And oftentimes we think of it as we take it for granted. And so really understanding the complexities of what goes into education isn't easy, can't be done in an afternoon. And so I think a lot of people just put it out of their minds. And so I think that is, I think unfortunately that is a detractor to the conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, we have the funds, and by we I mean not only the Fay School, but independent schools have funds that go unused for tuition assistance, and people just don't see the value necessarily in even applying it, even considering it. They don't understand the kind of evaluative questions you can ask of both your public and your private school options to figure out. I think second only to the church your family attends, the school your family attends, is such a critical value-based decision. And I mean values in all sense of the word, right? How we behave as a family.
Yeah.
You know, the things we hold closest, the things that are non-negotiable for our family are absolutely important. You know, your child is going to spend more time at school than they are with you, frankly.
Are there organizations like A Better Chance here in Houston that help kids who would never think, and their parents would never think about going to a private school, that help them, and sort of 100% of it is supported because these kids their families could not afford any of it?
Yes, and I think that, you know, the struggle, a struggle, not the struggle, a struggle private schools have is, right, let's step back and recognize that you're working with a clientele, right, that expects this level of education. That's the reason they asked all those questions going into it. And we do know that if you put a child into a third grade classroom that's operating at a kindergarten level, it changes the classroom.
Right.
And how do you say to the parent who just paid a $20,000 tuition, well, your experience for your child is now less than? And I'm not making a value judgment about that conversation, but it is a challenge that we have to face in private schools, is that, are we brave? Are we willing to have that conversation? Does it match our mission? We're nonprofits. You know, we've said this is what we do. Families have come to us for this, and now we're changing the game a bit. And if that's our mission, that's great. And I think we should have more schools with that mission. And I
this
wish
is a conversation that many schools have, right?
Absolutely, and it's hard. And frankly, there are private schools here in the city who have been brave and tried to have that conversation and have really exposed themselves to serious risk because of it. It's hard. It's hard.
It's a difficult thing. Sherry Cavallari wants to know, can you explain your fundraising strategies for an annual fund drive and what makes it a big success?
Yeah, so we're a little bit different in that regard. We run actually a 5-week current family annual fund.
Oh, talk about that, because that seems interesting.
Yeah, so that it's probably, of all the things I've done at Fay, it's one of the things I'm proudest of. So typical private school annual funds run from September all the way to June 30. Close of the fiscal year, keep asking, drive up participation, get another gift in. And we really decided that if we philosophically believe that fundraising is a byproduct of everything else we do, and not an end unto itself, then we need to sort of change the game and look at a different way of doing it. And so we decided that we would spend 5 weeks. Our goals would be to increase individual family gifts. The focus would be on the relationship, and to look for 100% family participation. And that was really grounded in one of our core values, which is community. We believe education is an expression of community. If we really believe that's true, then we believe in every family saying yes or no to an annual fund gift, and not just blowing us off. So we really looked at a 5-week strategy, and a really abbreviated version of that is we drop solicitation letters in the mail right before the 5 weeks start. Week 1, we have a phone-a-thon. My volunteers, I think...
Lots of parents are the volunteers?
Lots of parents, and I will give them credit. I think the best fundraiser in Houston are my volunteers. They're awesome, and I think all of us in the nonprofit world should be saying that over and over and over again. They work really hard, they believe in what we do, and they ask other people for money for us, and I think nothing is more powerful. And so my annual fund volunteers run a phone-a-thon in week 1. Everyone gets a call. We get lots of people saying, well, I just got the letter, which is a great opportunity to talk about strategy. Well, we do this in 5 weeks, so make sure you open that letter up. And again, I go back to my comment about donors should see strategy at work. It's okay if they're confused. Explain the 5-week annual fund for current families to them. Why do we do it this way? Because when they sort of step back and think about it, they're like, oh, yeah, I'd prefer we just move on and get back to the business of educating kids, not fundraising endlessly. So we do a phone-a-thon. We go quiet in week 2, let people think about it. In week 3, we do more informal follow-ups. Week 4, we go quiet again. In week 5, we have a closing phone-a-thon. And I really push my volunteers that yes, you're asking for a gift to the school, but more importantly, you're asking whoever you get on the phone, you're asking them to have a conversation, whoever the decision maker is. That's what we want. We want them to, in this 5-week period, sit down at the kitchen table and talk about what the last 12 months have looked like and how that should be reflected in a gift this year. That's what we're really asking for. They're going to make the gift on their own.
Wow, very good. All right, let's get to the really important questions now. So your favorite restaurant in Houston, Michael?
That's such a hard one. My staff teases me because I love to eat, just period.
Good.
So I will give a plug for my new favorite restaurant, which it changes every few months, but I went to Bernadine's in the Heights.
Oh, I've not been.
Gosh, I went last week, and it surprised me, which doesn't, there's lots of great food in Houston. It's one of the reasons I love living here. It was phenomenal.
Wow.
It was absolutely phenomenal. It really caught me off guard.
So that's your new favorite?
That's my new favorite right now. I've already made more reservations with different friends. I should be on their marketing team.
I need to go there.
Yeah.
So what's an old favorite?
Oh my gosh, an old favorite, petrol station.
I don't know that place.
Oh,
where is that?
North of 610.
Oh, it's outside of the loop.
It's outside of the loop. I know. Yeah, I didn't think I was a loop snob until I realized I was a total loop snob, and people at work were letting me know that. But yeah, it's just north of 610. Most amazing burgers. I'm also a beer snob, and so they have great beer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, love it.
And is there a place in Houston that you think is sort of a nice little secret, the best kept secret?
I don't know how much of a secret it is. I was sort of surprised when I went there. There's a lot of people at Memorial Park walking the track.
Yeah.
Just across the street is the Arboretum. If you have not walked their nature trails, it's in the middle of Houston.
Yeah.
Growing up, all I knew about Houston was I-45 on the way to Galveston.
Yep.
Assumed it was a concrete jungle, and when I had to move here for a job, I was fairly distraught over it, and then just discovered that the city is nothing like what I thought. And the Arboretum, they have a 3-mile hiking trail that you just...
It's beautiful over there.
It's amazing. You're just in the woods.
That is a great little secret.
Yeah, it's not manicured. It's just there.
Yeah.
It's really great.
This week I had breakfast at this place called the Dunleavy. Have you heard of this? It's right on Buffalo Bayou.
Yes.
Dunleavy and Allen Parkway.
Yes, I have not been there, but I know of it. Yeah.
It's sort of new too. Yeah. That's a great little place. All right. So when they make the Michael Larson story in Hollywood, if they made it this year, for some reason you would become overly famous. Who would play you?
Fact or fiction movie?
Oh, it doesn't matter to me.
All right. Well, so there's 2 answers. Fact movie,
Excellent.
I think would be his name just escaped me. Talk Soup and Community.
Oh, Joel
McHale.
Joel McHale.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now that's the fact movie
Okay.
because I really do. I think the most important thing is to laugh every day. If you can't show up and enjoy your job, you are in the wrong place. In a total fiction movie, I think it would have to be Willem Dafoe.
Oh.
The guy just that would be amazing. He surprises me every time I see him in a movie, and so I would be absolutely
quirky.
complimented to have him play me. It would be nothing like me, but I would take it.
Very good.
Yeah.
Talk Soup.
Talk Soup. There you go.
I guess they're canceling.
I know. I think it's the run is over, which is too bad. He's great. Very
good.
Yeah.
Michael Larson from the Fay School. Mike, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, and thank you for all that you do for kids in our community. And keep up the great work.
I love being here, and I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right. Well, that's it for the Leadership Studio tonight. Hey, we'll see you in 2 weeks. And until then, keep up the good work. Take care.